So we'll jump in and get started. As we mentioned on the labs and such, some of you guys are getting some errors and such that as of right now, that's fine. I'm still getting the feedback on my side that says you did it. So I'm working with EC Council to see if there's some better messaging they can do on those particular labs. All right, so for the fundamentals of cyber threats, this is just a couple of objectives in this module. Going through that, the intent, tactics, vulnerabilities, things like that. So we're going to kind of cover them at a pretty high level. This is a pretty big module set, so there's going to be some sets or slides that I'll skip. I think we have a total of 83, so I'm not going to go to every single slide here, but I do want to scrape the high points. I encourage you to read that. There is a video, as always, from EC Council if you guys want more deeper material than what we covered in here. So with our cyber threats in the digital era, the cyber threats constantly jeopardize that CIA triangle, or the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that information. And we're going to kind of dive into what that looks like under the surface. So these are the main classifications of threats. We have our malware, which is a diverse category of exploits, of vulnerabilities within the system, including viruses, worms, trojans, ransomware, and spyware. We also have phishing attacks, which use deceptive tactics to trick individuals into revealing some sensitive information. You guys have seen a much larger push in this realm here lately, even down to your cell phones and getting random texts and different things coming through there. Your distributed denial of service, your DDoS attacks. Again, these are used to overwhelm any kind of system with excessive traffic, making it unavailable, right? By default, the system has to respond, and if you overwhelm it, it will end up crashing it. Those are typically done within botnets and involve some kind of compromised devices, which amplify the attack, causing financial losses. And then last but not least, which it's honestly probably the biggest one here later, is the insider threats. And those are individuals within the organization exploiting access privileges for malicious purposes. At the same time, this can be accidental, where, it mentions here like espionage, but really unintentional actions. So they're posing challenges to distinguishing malicious intent. We always think of blocking everything at the firewall and we should be safe, right? But unfortunately, the user is the worst kind of user, especially if that device leaves the network, goes home, picks up some nasties there, brings it back to the network, and then it's already sitting on the inside, so we don't necessarily monitor the inside. So when we do our monitoring, we have to make sure we're monitoring at the firewall level, but also weird traffic going on locally within our network as well. As far as impact, the biggest one.
Did he freeze for anybody else?
Yeah, I'm thinking he did. I wasn't sure if it was me or not.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It's boring, but
okay. Hopefully you still hear me there. Sorry about that.
Yep.
Let me get this shared back out. That's my dock. Okay, hopefully everybody can go. You guys can see the screen again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Make sure the recording's still going. All right, looks like it is. All right, so ignore that part of the video. Sorry about that. One of the biggest impacts we always fight about or worry about the most is our financial loss. And those can lead, specifically on ransomware payments, but really even disruption can cause just impact on our business, particularly if we are a financial institution or do anything that is transactional based and those transactions are down, therefore costing money. We also have a bigger issues of data breaches lately. This includes any kind of personal information, client information, customer information, etc., and ultimately can lead to things like customer trust loss, or extensive remediation efforts. And the federal government has really stepped up on this side to extend, penalties for loss of data during cyber attacks. The disruption of the critical infrastructure for things like energy, healthcare, transportation, et cetera, are all prime targets. I actually wrote a lab set for this for the Center for Cybersecurity in the United States, and that was a big eye opener, is just how many people don't realize how vulnerable the critical infrastructure is. Primarily because we think, if businesses are secure, those must be really secure, right? And the sad part of it is most of these are using old school SCADA systems, PLC controllers, etc., and they're not really built for security at all. They're built for reliability and uptime, but they really don't have any focus on security, and it's actually hard to secure some of these environments. So there's a lot of training going on trying to protect that critical infrastructure. And then last is kind of some national security threats, state-sponsored espionage, whether in our case, China, Russia, et cetera, trying to attack into our systems. We've already seen in some military and some of even the war that's going on in Russia, Ukraine, where they were utilizing cyber threats in order to cause issues. And it was a whole different type of warfare just within that side of it. All right. Other vulnerabilities that we have to kind of be privy to, software vulnerabilities, mostly this human factor. Social engineering, since I started working with cyber back in the early 2000s, this has been the biggest one that people have ramped up on, is the ability to pretend that you are somebody else and you want to extract information out of them. It's gotten nothing but worse with the advent of things like AI, where you can sound like the person, you can interact as if you're the person. I've seen phone calls even here lately where they sound like your boss, right? And they're asking questions and writing quick responses as if you're the boss. And so you have those traditional ones where they're, some random numbers calling me, but you detect the voice on the other side, right? That kind of thing is even becoming more and more hard to analyze whether or not it's true or not. Most of the emails, phishing attacks like that, you can generally see with a little bit of training, but they are getting better and better out there. All right, Internet of Things. This is another one, particularly because a lot of early devices that came out with IoT, whether it was early cameras, fridges, other doodads around the home and office, they didn't even have ability to upgrade, right? So the firmware was pretty much flashed to it. There was no way to upgrade that. And because of that, when there were security vulnerabilities, there's nothing you could really do. Now, newer devices have gotten much better about that. But more and more, that's when we talk about those botnets. It's really little devices that are running small Linux. They don't have to be all that powerful, but if you get enough of them together, you can do a lot of damage. Other best practices we look at, obviously doing some encryption on this side, utilizing some more robust encryption algorithms than we've used in the past. Network security, this is really where most people focus today, is making sure that you have not just firewalls, but IDS solutions, IPS solutions, utilizing things like virtual private networks so that you're not using, the coffee house Wi-Fi or the hotel Wi-Fi, that you're actually trying to encrypt a little bit of the data that goes across there. And trying to help fortify that defense. And then last but not least, this is where a lot of companies suffer the most, is not having any kind of incident response or recovery or even disaster recovery plans. It doesn't have to be a tornado or a fire or something like that to trigger a disaster recovery, right? There's several events out there that seem very minuscule that will trigger these type of disaster recovery events, particularly if you don't have them in place. So for example, I was consulting with a company that, we had multiple layers of backups and strategies and this and that in there. But it turned out when the data center lost its power, it reverted back over to generator power. We thought we were good to go. It had batteries to hold that up. No big deal. After about 48 hours of running on generator power, they were about to switch back over to the main line. And when they did that switch, it killed power to the entire data center. Everybody that was in there, all their servers shut off. Normally not a huge deal. Everything slowly comes back up, but we found out on our servers, for whatever reason, they had lost a bunch of settings along the way, whether that was through upgrades, whatever it else, but they were not set to auto power back on. And even though they were set, some of them were set to auto power back on, the virtual machines, etc., were not set to auto start back up, which killed all of our remote connectivity. We had to physically go to that data center or send somebody on site to do that. And even when we did that, in the world, if any of you have worked in VMware world or any of the virtualization side, VMware specifically, vCenter really doesn't tolerate being shut down instantly, kind of thing. And it needs a long, slow shutdown procedure. And your chances of getting data corruption are pretty high. And once you've corrupted a vCenter, it's often hard to recover from. So when things like that happen, it was a very simple power outage, no big deal. And it ended up taking 5 days to recover everything out of there, constantly trying to recover from data remotely. Backups that we had at other offsites, that was all great, but a lot of that stuff was corrupted during that process. So we found that, extra battery support that we put in our racks, which is more cost, but in terms of disaster recovery, that helped us out tremendously. Let's see here. So emerging threats that are coming up, as we mentioned before, the advent of artificial intelligence, and more of what we see on our side is machine learning. A lot of people use those two terms interchangeably, and it's not necessarily the same thing. We've had machine learning and AI in technology like this for a very long time. Machine learning specifically has been around for a very long time in these products, but most people are just now starting to understand what the concept of AI is, particularly with the generative AI stuff that's out there. And really what that helps is the novices that can ask for something from an AI and help it generate scripts out or generate attacks or how they would do that kind of thing. In the research that I've done here at the university, a lot of that is, mitigated if you're using Chat GPT, et cetera. It has training wheels, meaning that it has guardrails to make sure that it doesn't give you information it's not supposed to give you. But it takes nothing for you to spin up your own learning language model and make sure it has one that has no guardrails on it. And you can pretty much ask it and it'll give you anything you want it to give it, especially if you start to train it. As a matter of fact, that's something that we're playing with even here in the Cyber Institute, is building a language model that still has some guardrails, but we took a lot of the ones off when it comes to cyber. So if we needed to help us generate a script to go do XYZ, that it'll actually do that. And then we would have to take it one step further and actually execute the script. However, at the same time, we can use things like assistance within that generative AI and it would go take off. Some of the coolest things I saw back in the day in the early 2000s was Core Impact. And if anybody's ever played with that tool, it was pretty awesome. You basically dropped it on a computer inside the network and it would exfiltrate every single device on the network, find out if there was any vulnerabilities, and then immediately exploit those vulnerabilities and give you a shell prompt. And it did it in a very short amount of time. Very expensive piece of software, but it was a great way for doing pen tests and things like that, and doing it in short order. And then you could actually get a report back of what vulnerabilities were, how to go ahead and prevent those or how to remediate those. Really cool. Now, that was okay, but now when you add it on the top of AI and generative AI, you can really get some reporting out of there that will generate better text coming out of there, make it sound better. And then you as a MSP or a cybersecurity company, et cetera, are paying for these tools to make your process faster. Some always thought it was cheating. I never saw it as cheating because honestly, everybody else is going to use it. So how can you use it to make your client get the information they need faster? That's really what at the end of the day. And a lot of these quote AI jobs that are coming up, there's really no jobs around AI itself. It's whether or not you can utilize AI to do your current job. Anyway, small soapbox, but that's really what I've been seeing in the cyber world as to how we're going to see that take a better play. Then quantum computing and cybersecurity, that's really going to threaten the traditional cryptographic algorithms because they can get through them much, much faster than what we've used in the past. International cooperation. This is usually a crucial due to any kind of transnational nature of cyber threats, establishing some kind of frameworks or resilience across multiple companies or geopolitical complexities. This is really starting to ramp up, and you're seeing this across the world. All right. How many of you guys have had any kind of experience with ransomware?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, it's not fun, right?
No.
So one of the things that we're even doing here at the Cybersecurity Institute is really trying to get small businesses understanding the concept of ransomware, and the fact that they are a 2 to 3 person company does not stop people from wanting to ransomware attack their company. As a matter of fact, it even gives them, in some cases, a bigger target, because it's their entire company, right? They're going to be willing to pay anything to get it back, where a bigger company may go, we'll do backups or we'll pull it back. It's no big deal. Small companies have no choice. They either pay up or they're going to lose everything. And even if they pay up, they essentially still kind of lost everything. So helping people understand that having things like this, or even having, cyber insurance in place so that you're not going to have to pay out of your operating costs, et cetera, et cetera. But that cyber insurance comes with a lot of lockstep things that you must complete in order to be eligible for insurance, which is great because that gets some companies to do things that they should have already been doing. But the fact that they understand the concept of insurance and you're only eligible for that insurance if you complete these really helps starts that ball rolling. So typically in the life cycle of things, you're going to see them encrypt some kind of files and render them accessible to the end user. Those attackers will then demand some kind of ransom, typically in cryptocurrency, for decrypting those keys or restoring the access. Sometimes they will ship that data off-site, so they have backup copies of it, and then they can go through the threatened process of releasing it on the dark web or whatever else. Evolving in sophistication, that ransomware will possess a constant challenge for cybersecurity. They start usually with phishing emails or any kind of malicious links, etc. The victim interacts with that, and then it can go through and try to exploit some vulnerabilities. The big thing that most people don't understand is this doesn't happen overnight. They usually have to work a long way through the system. A lot of times they've been in your network for 30 days, 90 days, etc., collecting all the information and everything they can along the way. All right. So some impacts that will be centered around ransomware, mostly that your critical files will disrupt some kind of operation going through there, causing downtime for the business. We've seen this here even at our local high school when they got attacked here not too long ago, along with some other healthcare infrastructure. Ransomware can, they call it psychological stress, creating some kind of vulnerability and uncertainty, especially if you are, again, a small company and you now not only have your files encrypted, but you have the loss of all your clients. And are you going to lose those clients as a result of having a ransomware attack? All right. So usually they have to have some kind of intent, right? Or motive to gain after your information. And so really understanding those intents are really going to help understand what you need to protect. In other words, they're not going to come after the data that's useless to them. They got to have some kind of information that's useful to them, or they typically won't come and attack for generic reasons. So they really want your sensitive information, your personal data, financial records, any kind of intellectual property. If they just are paid to disrupt your service so that another service can prevail, or gain any kind of unauthorized access to systems for control and manipulation, for example, physical access, door locks, keys, etc., or even into surveillance in the case of espionage, or just the ability to physically see your camera system so they can see what they can get around. They're usually looking primarily for financial gain. There are going to be some political gain from state-sponsored attackers. And this can even be, unfortunately, within our own company or within our own country in this case. Some ideological or hacktivist motivation. This is typically your anonymous stuff that we see out there. Any kind of competitive advantage and thrill seeking or a malicious intent. Those are usually what used to be called the script kiddies out there. Anymore, it's somebody that's just trying to prove a point, become popular with what they're trying to do. They really have no specific agenda. They just want to claim that they got it done, which are the worst kind. There's no negotiating if somebody has no real purpose as to why they're doing it. They're just doing it for the fun of doing it. They're looking after their data theft, service disruption, compromise, etc. I'm going to kind of graze over that because we've talked about it before. From an email compromise attack, they're typically, again, the attacker sending some kind of phishing email over. They're looking to monitor inside communications and collect any kind of data. And then we're going to impersonate any kind of executives, use attacks, compromise for that. Once they've compromised the accounts, then unknowingly employees will tend to comply or believe some kind of requests are legitimate, move them through. This is usually the overall how do they trick it kind of thing. But they gets pretty detailed as to how they do it. So for example, those tactics are typically high level. Again, we're not trying to write vulnerabilities these days. They're still there. But once we can gain inside access, in other words, instead of me trying to crack your password, if I can just get you to give it to me somehow, whether that's asking for it or capturing it because I had you type it in on a certain website or something like that, that's much, much easier than me trying to worry about cracking your password. And believe it or not, it's actually significantly easier as people put a lot of trust in there. So for data exfiltration, this will typically identify some kind of target system with known vulnerabilities. They'll conduct a reconnaissance to gather that information, develop or acquire some kind of exploit code to take advantage of that, deliver it to the target system with the payload and gaining unauthorized access. And then they tend to establish persistence on the compromised system. If we can get to it this semester, like I said, I have a really good lab set of doing this on a water treatment facility, and it gives us the ability to actually overload the tanks and cause mass chaos in there as well. But understanding how they're doing this is crucial for us cybersecurity professionals in order to recognize and respond effectively when we see these threat actors. Most of this establishes on that persistent side, but that data exfiltration is a lot of times they're going to exfiltrate it in a way that your firewall is not going to identify it, or your IDS or IPS, etc. They'll send it over DNS. There's a couple different ways that they can extract that information off the network and you not really see what's going on. In a practical example, this is typically what we would do in a pen test. They use the same scenario because that's how they're attacking. So they're going to do some recon, figure out who the key individuals are, use social media, etc., in order to tailor some phishing messages. This can get even more detailed now with the advent of, AI, generative text, etc. There used to be some pretty cool tools to generate emails and things like that were kind of templates. These days, if you send information or everything you gather about a person and have it impersonate that person, it does a pretty good job of generating some of the text and emails that can come out of there. From there, they'll weaponize it, create some convincing ones or personalized, and use social engineering techniques in order to get access. They'll deliver those, and then they're waiting for the unscrupulous victim or the uninformed employee in order to click on some of those vulnerabilities and give them access. One of the key words in this one is lateral movement. So the idea is once you've infiltrated the network, your goal or at the start is going to be some lateral movement. And in that case, I'm on Jason's PC at Fort Hays. I need to identify other systems on that same network that PC's on and try to map out the internal infrastructure. You're going to explore, understand its layout, other targets that could potentially be useful, etc. From there, we'll have to move up privilege escalation, and that's going to be exploiting any kind of vulnerabilities, gain a higher level access. A lot of times you accidentally have those abilities to do that on the network, whether you were troubleshooting in the past and forgot to turn it off, things like that. But you acquire other credentials, elevate privileges, etc. You might be able to set up a sniffer on the network and pull other passwords that are being transmitted in clear text, if that's still a thing. And then once you gain those credentials, you can use those to leverage compromised systems through things like password cracking, etc. So even if you get the hashes going across the network, you can then crack those hashes to get privilege escalation. APT is your advanced persistent threats, and these usually start with a spear phishing campaign that exploits some kind of human vulnerability. Your boss sending you an email that says, hey, really quick, log into this system and get this done for me. I'm heading to a meeting. Things like that are really, really common these days. Attackers are then going to kind of employ any kind of tactics for that lateral movement, covert communication, persistence, etc. But again, this happens over an extended period of time without any kind of detection. If they jump in and start immediately copying files off the system, generally most IDS IPS solutions would trigger that. They should say, hey, all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of traffic come from this PC. It would be much better if they, basically drop the pebbles, right? So you're breaking out of prison, you tore down the concrete wall, you drop the pebbles out in the roadway. What was the old movie that kind of described that? Yeah.
Was it Shawshank Redemption?
Shawshank, thank you. Yep. So Shawshank, right? He took the pebbles out, scattered them in the yard. Nobody knew what was going on. That persistence of doing that is exactly the way these guys are pulling this data out of there. They're not trying to do it in large quantities. They help organizations develop any kind of proactive defense on this and incident response plans that can help mitigate this kind of traffic going out. All right. So what in this case is the opportunity for them to access some of our systems, right? And so from the blue team perspective, which is what most of you are going to be coming from, is where are our opportunities for people to come attack us? And that could be from a lack of certain security measures, old, undated, weak passwords, etc., unpatched systems. And again, most people think because it's on the inside, there's no reason to really patch it. In this case, all they have to do is gain some other way through your system in order to do that. Obviously, we've talked about social engineering. Any misconfiguration that, this kind of goes back to us not having our VMs being able to boot up after a power outage. That caused some issues in there. So very simple misconfigurations, particularly when it comes to, if anybody's ever worked in Active Directory or LDAP, it's really easy to get things misconfigured and accidentally give more privileges than what they're supposed to get. From third-party dependencies. And this is where you see a lot of breaches here recently, where your software, your system is excellent, but you didn't vet the third parties that you allowed on your network. So you didn't vet the HVAC company, and that's how Target was actually exfiltrated on their side, right? They came in through the HVAC system, and then from there, they got access to the rest of the network. Other vulnerabilities, software vulnerabilities, any kind of hardware vulnerabilities, whether they're able to do exploits on the processor, the memory, any kind of peripherals that are on the system. There's a lot of easy ways to get into networks these days. Configuration vulnerabilities, we've talked about that, default passwords, unrestricted access, and then human vulnerabilities, which are, again, usually the weakest link, easiest point of entry. Other weaknesses that might be out there would be any architectural weaknesses. So by design, if they compromise this, they attack everything. One of the key ones that we'll see in that is on your backups, right? If you're doing backups on the exact same system, but you also have no offsite, or in the old days, we call them tape backups, some way of having cold backups sitting there waiting. In the case of ransomware, that's huge, right? Most people or attackers won't just go after your systems. They're going to go after your backups, because that's the first thing you're going to say is, we have backups. We're good to go. Well, if it's on an offsite location, but you're doing a VPN in order to do those backups every night at midnight, again, you think you're safe because you open the tunnel, shut down the tunnel over during that, right? It's actually a fairly secure way of doing it. However, if they're already on your network and persisted on your network and have been there for 90 days, they've noticed that tunnel go up. They go over there, pull the information or encrypt it before that process shuts down. And at that point, they've got both you and your quote offsite backups. So I've actually seen that happen. It's not handy. They had a good solution, but they didn't think everything all the way through. Policy and governance. This is a huge part of cybersecurity today. As a matter of fact, in our master's program here, I have two different ones. We have a cybersecurity program and an information assurance program. And that's because this information assurance side has really, really blown up. As a matter of fact, the jobs and everything else are the exact same pay now. And most of that is because companies have very weak security policies, compliance procedures, particularly if they're working with any kind of government institution. They found out that they have a lot of compliance to meet. So this can cause more issues than a bad firewall. Is just having really bad security practices and policies for your employees, your governance, things like that. Resource constraints. Almost everybody deals with limited resources, budget, staffing, expertise, trainings, etc. So really using those effectively and finding out the best way to countermeasure those threats. And then at the end there, same way, cultural weakness is just training of everybody around you, making sure that your staff, yes, they have to go through quote cybersecurity or security awareness training every year, but are they actually listening to what's going on? And do they buy in as to why that's a real threat? If they don't, that's going to be the hardest point of your job, is getting them to understand that, hey, you're the weakest link here. I protected the network, but you're the weakest link inside the network. All right. So a practical example for an e-commerce website, looking for an opportunity. The website's using outdated software or plugins. In this case, this is very, very common with things like WordPress websites, where they're really trying to attack any of the software or the plugins that you're using on those websites. Customer data is stored without encryption within the database. User authentication mechanisms are weak with very simple passwords and no multi-factor. Security patches and updates are not applied promptly, and the employee lacks awareness on phishing attacks. So the vulnerability itself is it's using an old e-commerce. Security patches are not, you can see the list here. Note that everything kind of seems like it's talking about the same thing, but it's really not. There's a difference between your opportunities, your vulnerabilities, and your weaknesses. Those are the ones that most students and even myself sometimes forget how to separate that out. A lot of them are very similar and related, but they're identified in a different way. From there, on the exploitation, they exploited that old, outdated platform. They can hit the impact on there and mitigation. This exercise that you see on the screen is really common during business continuity process planning, is really within this here, and making sure that you have identified this within your company. And it should really be done at minimum on an annual basis, and often should be done or revisited anytime there's a new piece of software or new product that enters the network. Here's a good example on online banking services. I'll let you look through those. So vulnerability side, we've talked about these just again as a brief overview. Any kind of software vulnerabilities, hardware vulnerabilities, all the way through the vulnerable factors. I'm going to skip through here just to see. So here's a good example here that they found an outdated CRM software. And from that, they can exploit that to get the crafted responses and access once they get in there to manipulate that CRM data. And then they develop persistence or backdoors in order to get that. Even after you've patched the system, they've already set up a backdoor, and now they can start to exfiltrate that data, sending it out for either financial gain or even some other type of cyber attack that they can go deeper on. You guys have any questions on the vulnerability side of things? Okay. On the threats and attacks, these are, again, all the different ways that people will come in and try to attack. We've highlighted several of these before. Ones that we haven't necessarily hit hard on is going to be like Trojans and viruses. Make sure you understand the difference between those. Viruses are programs that are self-replicating and will cause damage to files and functionalities. Trojans are something that pretends to be legitimate, but they're still stealing data or enabling remote access. Let's see here. Phishing and spear phishing. Again, the main difference between this is they're really tailored phishing attacks that use any kind of personal info to give any kind of credibility. So instead of a generic give us your info kind of thing, it's your boss asking for you to give you the info. And then, of course, whaling on this side is really targeting any kind of executive for access to kind of sensitive corporate data or resources. This is where you go after the CEOs or the vice president of finance. That kind of stuff is really this part here. Let's see, 0-day exploits. Remote code execution is pretty common. SQL injection, it's still around. It's not as common as it used to be because a lot of services are protecting that side of it. In the PHP days, etc., that used to be a pretty big vulnerability. Most of it now is things like cross-site scripting, just poorly written websites that are keeping cookie data, writing clear text, that kind of thing. Let's see here. Rest of those we've kind of talked about so far. Again, some things are targeted and some things are just opportunistic. If somebody finds a vulnerability, they may be just taking advantage of the opportunity with no real intention as to what they're trying to do. Same way, again, with your persistent versus opportunistic. Most of those are going to have some kind of advanced persistence going through there, where they're constantly probing, adapting, and evolving. A good point or example here is if I fire up a website here on the Fort Hays website or Fort Hays campus, particularly if I have one of the informatics addresses, those are public addresses, right? And within 2 to 3 minutes, I have people all over the world scanning that system, trying to find the login.php file, trying to find the admin.php file, the WordPress.admin file. I mean, all the common things that you try to dump in a new system, within seconds, I get hit that. And so academia gets hit, corporates are going to get hit. Anybody that has that public persistence out there that isn't being looked at. So how do we mitigate some of these things from happening? And a lot of it comes in defense in depth. This is a pretty cool topic that most people utilize. So it's multiple security controls, multiple firewalls, antivirus, etc. A lot of times you can't fix really old software that's required on your system, but you can protect yourself by doing defense in depth, making it where they have to get through 5 different things before they can ever get to that one vulnerable piece. And you're going to find that a lot, that, there's some threats that you just can't get rid of. You need to accept those as either the opportunities or vulnerabilities side. But what you really want to do is make sure that you've isolated them to a point that they would have to get through 3 or 4 other systems in order to get there. User awareness training, we talked about that. Security awareness training. Vulnerability management, incident response planning. Again, this is a huge part of what most of your jobs coming in, quote, cybersecurity these days. Even if you are the attacker and the guy that likes to hack and do all that kind of stuff, you are going to be restricted by whatever incident response plan's out there. So your best case is taking part in this incident response planning. And that way you are understanding whose job responsibility it is, and you can protect yourself from different things. So a lot of times this kind of stuff will happen, and most people won't update what is really vulnerable. So HR throws something up, you didn't realize that they were doing this new way or storing it in an Excel file to make it easier, and you've protected all the HR, CRM software and everything, but you didn't protect that Excel file that was out there. And because that person had extracted that data off the CRM and was manipulating it, they're now left vulnerable to that Excel file that was just left in the downloads folder on their laptop, right? Again, real incidents that we've seen happen over the time. Threat intelligence, this is really, again, back to the whole SOC piece of this, is the ability to monitor those emerging cyber threats, the vulnerabilities, and the tactics that are being used, and with your SIME or industry collaboration, however you're getting that information, and then really developing any kind of secure development practices, especially if you're writing code, using it to test vulnerable environments. You typically want to make sure those development environments are nowhere near your production environments. We did that in the past when I worked in a company. We were just doing development right there on the admin network. Wasn't a big deal. But it turned out as we were getting ready to push an update to replace something, somehow that config file got moved from test into the production system. because the IP address, in this case, the domain name was pointing to it. In that case, it pulled the wrong config file and caused a lot of headaches and a lot of issues. It wasn't an outside threat, that was an inside threat, but it was a very easy mistake that caused the exact same issues that would have been if somebody attacked us from the outside. All right. Again, more examples of different attacks. I'm not going to go through all these. You guys can definitely look at that. Man in the middle attack is your credential harvesting. A lot of times what you'll see on this side, somebody will send you some kind of phishing attack telling you to log in here. It looks like the Fort Hayes login page and everything else, but you'll notice some things are just slightly different. The URL is different at the top or something else. But if you're in a hurry and you're not looking at the URL to see what it should be, this is typically where they'll try to capture some kind of man in the middle attack. Thankfully, a lot of this can be, thwarted with multi-factor authentication, but even multi-factor authentication these days can be taken advantage of. If I can get advantage of your email, then try to log into a system, it sends you an email or a text or something like that, and you give up that information. They're getting really, really good at this. I actually had a phone call here the other day from somebody that was pretending to be Google. And they were saying, hey, we've seen some threats on your account. Did you have some remote activity of you logging in Utah? I was like, no, that wasn't me. But I go in immediately on the backside, look into my Google side, and sure enough, somebody from Utah was trying to log into my system. So it gave it a little bit of legitimacy to them, that they had seen some attacks, but something still wasn't quite right. They were needing to, get my multi-factor code off my phone and hit yes to authenticate. I was like, why would you need to have me do that if you are truly Google? You could do it on your side. Well, this is our new process, our new system. And the scary part about that whole phone call was at least I knew kind of what was going on behind the scene. If that was one of my parents or somebody else that had no idea, they could have there was enough legitimacy to that phone call. They would have very easily given up a lot of information coming in. All right. Network-based attacks. This would be things like DNS spoofing or DNS cache poisoning. This is where, you type in fidelitybank.com and it sends you to a fraudulent site instead of the actual banking site. And that's mostly because we injected the DNS records and told it to go to our IP address as opposed to the DNS that's resolving on the inside. So pretty simple attack in which we're redirecting that fraudulent website to overwrite another one. Other network-based attacks, using some evasion techniques to evade that kind of detection. Maybe we're going to use some different IP addresses, obfuscate some things going through there to kind of block any kind of malicious activities going on the network, particularly if you have intrusion detection systems, IDS solutions. That's really what they're trying to do, is evade on this case. What you don't want to do is run an nmap scan over the whole network and do it as a blast, right? It's going to raise a huge red flag on the network. Why are all these SYN packets being hit to every single PC? If you mitigate that and time it where it's a couple packets, couple more packets, then change to source from a different IP and send a couple more packets, then change to another IP and send a couple more packets. If you try to do it all from one, then all of a sudden those IDS solutions are going to kind of pick that up. Extended exploitation. This is where they're going to extend that by launching additional attacks, kind of distributing malware to other systems, and harvesting those credentials even further. I may compromise Sally's laptop, and really what I'm trying to do is get to Jack's laptop. But once I'm in Sally's laptop, maybe I set up a keylogger, knowing that Jack in some way is going to have to log in. Maybe I send a spear phishing email to Jack saying, Sally needs assistance on her laptop. Will you help her with it? He goes over, logs in with his credentials. I now have his credentials, right? He didn't give up his credentials, but because I had a keylogger on Sally's system, I now have his credentials on the inside. Impact and detection, our mitigation and prevention here, and then our DNS spoofing attack that we saw before. Application side, there again, most of what you're going to see here is cross-site scripting. So it's pretty good to be familiar with this. When you go through the labs, particularly in the CYSA, you guys will play with NITO or NITO. It's a pretty good way of doing some cross-site scripting attacks. really just grabbing cookie information and doing session hijacking. So you may log into a website, and the legitimate website, but I can steal your cookie that came back out of that then helps you stay authenticated and logged in. And I can then take that cookie to, make my browser believe that it's already logged in and go on. I don't even need to get your credentials. I just steal your session that you had. Really, really common these days. Again, don't even need passwords or anything else. I just steal your session. All right. Other types of cross-site scripting. So again, this can be where they steal the credentials, or they send a email with a malicious link out to a website. When they run the credentials there, a script gets executed and they got it, or the user clicks a malicious link and starts continuing on. From there, as an attacker, I can steal that session cookie of the user, and the user or the attacker will post a malicious script to a forum post. Those people will respond to that, again, getting the links and stealing that information back. So be careful on the stuff you click on in Reddit, right? You're going there for troubleshooting info, but be aware of those URLs that are in there. Over time, those attackers and everybody else are going to be sending everything to the user. Website sends a bunch of information, doesn't really alert you of malicious activity because they're using your cookie or your session to go inside of there. All right. Let's see. Application attacks. A lot of things are starting to use HTTPS going through there. But they also have a new protocol for the HTTP Strict Transport Security, or HSTS, which is meant to overall enhance your web application security. You can also deploy WAFs, which is your web application firewalls, to monitor traffic right at the location of the application, and not just clear out at the firewall. So you can kind of detect and prevent any of these cross-site scripting attacks that would go through there. Understand what those are. In this case, you guys aren't really doing software development, right? What you need to know is whether or not that company has put thought into this and how they're mitigating their cross-site scripting vulnerabilities on their systems. It wouldn't hurt for you to, run some cross-site scripts against that. Thankfully, there's a lot out there for you guys to use for testing, especially on the web application firewall side. A lot of tools will test a product, and then you can make sure you're not vulnerable. On the host side, this is really telling you, look at the life cycle of this. This is about 8 months in order to compromise this system. So they do social engineering in month 1, try to get anything from you. They deploy some malware within month 2, that exploitation of a 0-day vulnerability during month 3. From there, month 4 and 5, they're doing lateral movements, just trying to figure out the network, map the infrastructure, locate any kind of servers that might house some sensitive data or anything else. Then they're going to slowly start exfiltrating that data as it comes out. They'll cover any of their kind of tracks by, using rootkits, altering logs to make it look like they was never in there. And then at the end, they'll do some kind of public dissemination, in which case a rival state publicly announced that they have released stolen quantity, falsifying, presenting it as their own discovery, end up causing severe damage to the company's reputation. So again, this doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen in 2 to 3 days. These guys are doing this over the course of 8 months. This can be loss of intellectual property, code, etc. It could be a research setback, reputational damage, and enhanced phishing awareness. There was a great article that came out here a while back about a research institution that was getting National Science Foundation money in order to do the research that they were doing. And they were doing some pretty high-level research for the government. But the primary contact, the instructor that was responsible for the lab, absolutely refused to put antivirus on the laptops. He thought it was nonsense. Even though they were federally required to do that as part of having that grant money. In the end, that institution was ordered to pay millions back to the National Science Foundation for breach of contract, as they were supposed to have antiviruses on all the laptops. They weren't even actually compromised or anything like that, that they know of. but they were found in violation of those contracts. And so if you guys are doing that or working at any kind of company that would handle that kind of information of another company, you guys would have that same thing where they could utilize you in order to gain access to those. All right. Same things that we've talked about there. Insider attacks. Again, this can be a disgruntled employee or just simple by accident. So some of this on the inside you'll see is malicious insider threats, people sabotaging, stealing data. Unintentional is even more, is this could be things like people falling for phishing, misconfiguring some settings that would allow people to go through, espionage, privilege abuse. This happens a lot, particularly where people are trying to get personal gain, revenge, or even just curiosity. How far can they get in the system, right? Insider trading, any kind of sabotage or credential theft and misuse. Ways to prevent that. And some examples of how that would work for competitor gain. So really this whole module is about just exposing you to examples of what this kind of stuff is. All right, malware, I think most of us have talked about that one. Phishing, again, we kind of know the common characteristics. Does anybody feel like they need to go into more depth for any of those? I don't want to glaze over something that somebody might be interested in.
Nope.
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. So make sure you understand the difference between all those different types of threats that are out there. Particularly, let's see if I can find that slide here. This one here. Come on. This one. So page 38 of that slide deck. Really know the differences between what these individuals are and the different types of threats out there. The other one that would be a really good one for you to really understand is this life cycle here. Understanding the difference between an opportunity, a vulnerability, and a weakness, and how you would identify that within your network. You can even do this example within your own home, or maybe if you work for an existing company, do this at a low level, see if you can identify these different characteristics. I've done this before where you literally have this columns on a piece of paper and start writing in different things that you think could be that, but writing these in such a way that they understand what's really going on. So the opportunity is that the website lacks HTTPS. The vulnerability is that it transmits over HTTP, and the weakness is that they should have better solutions to go through that, right? It doesn't have the resources to update that to HTTPS or to buy their own cert or whatever's going on. And then what exactly is the exploitation, what the impact that would be, and the mitigation. What's the specific title for someone that works with an insider threat? I've been looking, but I can't seem to find any. You know, there isn't going to be one job title that would just be for insider threats. It's still going to be the cybersecurity analyst. Now, a lot of what that part may be would be like your CISO. However, they're going to be focused more on the policies and governance side of it. And this part is really what your CISO is after. Some companies will split titles out where they are looking for the insider threats, or they are responsible for the IDS solutions. So for you, Peyton, like what you were asking there, you want to be more responsible for the IDS side, the intrusion detection, not the intrusion prevention side, right? So intrusion prevention is going to be more for firewalls coming in from the outside. Detection means that it's not a known vulnerability. So intrusion prevention works on the fact that it's known algorithms, known antivirus signatures, etc. You can protect those because you already have those known. And intrusion detection, those are using zero-day exploits or things that not necessarily have a signature to it. And you're trying to determine whether or not that is actually a threat or not. Does that answer what you're looking for, Peyton?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. Yeah. A lot of times they'll go hand in hand. An intrusion detection will work with an intrusion prevention system, that kind of thing. But on the intrusion detection side, that's usually harder to ramp up, and you're going to get lots of false positives. So really deciphering through that to figure out what's real, what's not real. And like where you're looking at, bigger industries, like particularly if they have a ton of different clients, that insider threat thing is going to be easier than you think it is. There again, people think it's always going to be the malicious employee. It's really some employee doing something that they think is mundane and should have no effect, like taking the data out of a CRM, putting it into an Excel file so they can manipulate things, but not protecting that Excel file, because now you took it from a super secure area, the CRM, and have it all dumped out into a CSV file.
Yeah, I had a lot of stories from over the summer because I worked with Insider Threat. It was pretty interesting. But
Did you see it as malicious, or was it more just uninformed employees?
well, I mean, I don't know what the split was. I don't know what it is exactly, but an overwhelming majority is just um, either false positive or true positive, but it was approved for their work.
Gotcha.
And then you do have that um, uneducated employee thing where they do stuff that they don't know is wrong, but it is wrong.
Yep.
Common thing that we had were people that like retired or leave the company, and let's say they worked on something for, I don't know, say 20 years, they worked on developing some product and they try to take that with them, but you were on payroll while you made that. So technically that's company data. You can't take that.
Yep.
So delete it. And then you have some people that are like, okay, fine. And you have others that are, no, I'm not going to delete it. And then we send them over to legal and they have fun with them. So,
Yep. And in the meantime, they could have dumped it out on the internet, or there
yeah.
again, even if they kept that data, if they were to be compromised now that they're not working for the company, they're working for a different one, their laptop got compromised, now your data is vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
Taking the data home, that's always a problem.
Yeah.
All right. So again, this whole thing is really in the fundamental stage. We're covering that. I believe there is a lab for this week, and most of you guys again have tried that. Just keep doing it, even if it says it failed or 0 out of 0. It's not a big deal. It is triggering on my side that you actually completed it. Next week, we're going to get into. Oh, that's an old one. Pull that up here. Next week is the introduction of a security operations center. So we're really going to focus on what a security operations center is, the different pieces and mechanisms of a security operations center, and kind of move forward there. So good content. And then after that, we dive deeper into the components and the architecture and how it's laid out. That would include the things that you can actually deploy in your home network. I can get you the resources so that you guys can deploy that kind of stuff locally. For example, Splunk and stuff like that. We have licenses. I typically do that in the grad side, but even the undergrad side, I'm more than happy to get you guys additional training outside of what the classroom can provide.
Sounds great.
All right. We'll see you guys Tuesday.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks.
Tiffany, Twan, you guys have any questions?
I'm good, thank you.
All right.